Most accounts of the secret inventions Tesla may have built are supported by hearsay and pseudoscience. But in the 1930s, Tesla announced that he had created a peace ray for the purpose of ending all war. A scientist working at MIT at the time claimed to have seen plans and a working model. Nikola Tesla died on January 7, 1943. 2 days later, all of his possessions were seized by the United States government. In the 1970s and 80s, the Department of Defense, CIA and FBI set about reorganizing and researching Tesla's notes and diaries, concerned that the Soviet Union was producing experiments based on his projected energy research. In 1989, as part of the Strategic Defense Initiative, tests were done involving a particle beam accelerator, similar to Tesla's peace ray.
You will help me build my satellite death rays. Death rays to destroy all the armies of the world, and those who stand in the way of progress will be shot by lasers.
I hope that you bookmark this site, Chemtrail Planet. It has a tremendous amount of information, and thank you, Jay Breezes, for leaving the link again underneath a recent video that I posted. Information that is necessary for anyone who needs to understand what is going on. And it's the subjects: dying trees, cloud types, animal deaths, fluoride, Monsanto, vaccines, homeopathy, false flags, mind control, trolls and chills, global warming scam, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, whistleblowers, gun control, chemtrail research, military and government documents, weaponized weather, strange rain and snow, slideshows, photos, and I'm on this page, directed energy weapons. Thank you, Jay Breezes, for creating this site and providing us with invaluable information to understand what is going on. Temperatures at which different materials burn or melt, the different colors of flames and the temperatures of that flame, and an awful lot of information just on one page about these directed energy weapons that are being used against Americans. The viability of directed energy weapons. This is on the heritage.org website. And let me just read a few passages. Directed energy weapons on the cusp of replacing chemical-powered weapons like conventional weapons. On the cusp, this was written, directed energy weapons have replaced the guns, the conventional weapons, the chemical-powered weapons. Directed energy weapons use the electromagnetic spectrum, light and radio energy, to attack pinpoint targets at the speed of light, defending against threats such as missiles and artillery shells, which directed energy weapons can shoot down in mid-flight. Particle beam weapons, which they now have, the kinetic energy imparted by a particle stream destroys the target by heating the target's atoms to the point that the material literally explodes. Wow, let me read that again. The kinetic energy imparted by a particle stream destroys the target by heating the target's atoms to the point that the material literally explodes.
Soviets are now on the threshold of deploying a particle beam weapon, which would throw giant lightning bolts up at incoming ballistic missiles to simply obliterate them. It is my judgment that the weapon has now been largely perfected and will appear in the field operationally early in the 1980s.
Can I ask you a question about some of the technology that you're developing to fight the war on terror, specifically directed energy and high-powered microwave technology? When do you envision that you can weaponize that type of technology?
Goodness. It is in, for the most part, the kinds of things you're talking about are in varying early stages.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Do you have anything you'd add?
I don't think I would add much. I think they are in early stages and probably not ready for employment at this point.
No, you're lying. You're lying. What makes you lie?
In the normal order of things, when you invest in research and development and begin a developmental project, you don't have any intention or expectations that one would use it. On the other hand, the real world intervenes from time to time, and you reach in there and take something out that is still in a developmental stage, and you might use it. So your question's not answerable. It depends on what happens in the future and how well things move along the track, and whether or not someone feels it's appropriate to reach into a development stage and see if something might be useful, as was the case with the unmanned aerial vehicles.
But you sound like you're willing to experiment with it.
I think that's the point, and I think, we have, I think, from the beginning of this conflict, I think General Franks has been very open to looking at new things if there are new things available, and has been willing to put them into the fight even before they've been fully wrung out. And I think that's not referring to these two particular cases of directed energy or high-powered microwave, but directed energy or high-powered microwave, but sure. And,
yes.
And we will continue to do that.
Lasers produce narrow single frequency, single color, coherent beams of light that are much more powerful than ordinary light sources. So, a free electron laser, this laser uses rings of magnetically confined electrons whirling at the speed of light to produce laser beams that can be turned or tuned up and down the electromagnetic spectrum, from microwaves to ultraviolet light. The power output necessary for a weapons-grade laser ranges from 10 kilowatts to 1 megawatt. When a laser beam strikes a target, the energy from the photons in the beam heats the target to the point of combustion or melting.
The idea to use directed energy as a weapon is around since Archimedes. Since about 1890, the word death ray was used for what today is named directed energy weapons. Reports about weapons using various forms of directed energy were very frequent back then. Let's for example have a look at publications in the United States magazine Modern Mechanics. In May 1929 we find the report "Death ray stops motors." The picture shows a device generating and projecting directed energy at a motorcycle to interfere with the ignition and thus stop the engine. A motorcycle is a relatively soft target because the ignition system is not covered by the sheet metal of the body like in a car. The wires of the ignition system can pick up radio frequency radiation easily, causing a variety of malfunctions. Which one will be the first to appear and cause the engine to stop depends on the exact circumstances. If sufficient energy of the right frequency is picked up by the wire leading to the spark plug, it will constantly fire. This video shows high-frequency sparking at a radio frequency generator. The distance between the two conductors is about the same as in a spark plug. The total power of the generator was less than 40 watts at 175 megahertz. The air-gas mixture already will ignite during the intake, the flame will pass to the carburetor and cause a fire, stopping the engine. A train of short pulses may cause early firing of the spark plug, which may damage the engine. Similar high-frequency sparking may also appear inside the ignition coil. In this case, the high-frequency sparks bridge the isolation and cause a short circuit of the high voltage produced by the coil. The spark plug does not fire and the engine stops. In January 1933, the Modern Mechanics article "Do Wild Radio Waves Cause Air Disasters?" explains the conditions under which radio waves cause dangerous effects. Thousands of volts may be induced in metallic structures, like the frames of skyscrapers, at some distance. This is especially the case when the length of the metallic structure matches the frequency of the transmitter. In this case, the metal object is in resonance with the radio frequency radiation and becomes an effective antenna. However, if the transmitted power is high enough, even metallic objects with a length not matching the wavelength may cause damage. This was the case with the Swiss shortwave transmitter Schwarzenburg in 1939. The transmitter building had been built from wood using iron nails. The English technicians warned that this would cause trouble and got the answer that there is no scientific proof that shortwave of 20 MHz could cause nails to glow. So the technicians installed the transmitter. During several short tests of only a few minutes, nothing happened. On the first operational day, the station director, after 40 minutes, called his superiors and asked for permission to terminate the transmission, or at least to reduce the power because the nails were glowing. Pointing to the fact that this was not scientifically possible, this was refused. Another 20 minutes later, the superiors received a call to send the fire brigade because the building was burning. This picture shows a large X-ray tube. X radiation may also be used in a directed energy weapon, but as the range of X-rays in air is restricted to a couple of meters, it cannot be used at long distance. It also requires special optics, which are complicated and expensive. The original directed energy death ray was heat radiation. Here is a picture of a powerful infrared projector published in 1936. Even if this infrared projector was barely able to kill, the effect would be very similar to the modern active denial system. Another heat ray device was already described by Alexei Tolstoy in his novel Geheimnisvolle Strahlen, English, The Death Box. He wrote the book after having lived between 1921 and 1923 in Germany. My copy, printed in East Berlin in 1957, has this interesting drawing. The energy source described is a compressed charge of a thermite-like composition, producing a continuous heat ray. The heat ray is focused by a parabolic mirror. In the vicinity of the focal point, a second hyperbolic mirror is reflecting the directed energy through a hole in the parabolic mirror. The small mirror in the drawing is bent in the wrong direction, but if carefully constructed, the heat would be projected in a thin, high-power beam. This combination is called Cassegrain reflector and used in optical telescopes. It would allow to use any powerful heat source, including a wood stove, to project a heat ray over some short distance. The sun, with its parallel rays, would allow for a very long-distance directed energy weapon. The exiting ray can be directed into any direction with a flat mirror. An amplitude modulation of such a heat ray, say with a twisting glass plate passing between angles of reflection and passage, should be able to produce sidebands and low-frequency beats between these sidebands. Such low-frequency beats induce electric currents in the body to affect the nerves. An effect only can be expected if the single waves of light are truly modulated in amplitude, not by simply dimming the light. A more portable directed energy gun was shown in the January 1935 issue of Modern Mechanics. This handy gun was reported to stun animals at a range of a mile. It was assumed that the heat used was generated by a thermite-like composition. Henri Claudel's directed energy weapon seems to be a laser-type death ray. There are various reports that lasers were known well before their invention in 1960. The theory was already published in 1916 by Albert Einstein. There are reports that since the 1930s it was technically possible to build a laser. Even if this apparatus was not a real coherent laser, it could be a sort of crystal rod, possibly doped, to produce a powerful light of a single frequency, if heated with a burner or electrically. Dr. Antonio Longoria is reported in February 1940 to having invented a death ray which also looks much like a powerful laser-style light generator. This article looks like a call to scientists to keep their research secret because of World War II, which just had started. Germany also was working on these techniques. Several United States Secret Service reports have been published about the use of such weapons against American aircraft in 1944. This German directed energy weapon was interfering with the ignition of the engines, much like the first one in this video.
Straight out of science fiction novels, could this be the Death Star inspiration? The Kugo death ray was in development as early as 1939, but never really saw the light of day during World War II. The magnetron laser-type beam was supposed to send a death ray out to destroy the intended target several hundred miles away. And this power beam never really worked like it was designed, thank goodness for that. The Japanese had big dreams that this could be the answer to their secret weapon arsenals, But calculations did not quite add up to laser beam success. Although calculations estimate that the ray could have killed a rabbit at about 100 yards away, but only if the rabbit was perfectly still for at least 5 minutes, the time it took the beam to reach it. Not exactly the most efficient war weapon, but great imagination. And thanks to Lucasfilm, we got to see an interstellar version on the big screen 30 years later.
The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
There were rumors you went to Colorado Springs in order to contact Mars. Is that true?
It is possible for us to send out waves which can travel around the world. There are waves as well which can travel into space.
How are you going to talk with them?
I never intended to. However, I recorded certain electrical impulses of unknown origin, and these were repeated at constantly timed intervals. It's possible they were a kind of signal from space.
And did you in turn send them a message?
Ask the Martians that question.
But you did send some sort of signal.
A signal which might not be received for 1,000,000 years.
Therefore, Mr. Tesla, you do believe communication with distant worlds may someday be possible.
Perhaps they've been sending us messages for ages, but we aren't aware of it.
Mr. Tesla, what's that big pile of papers down there on the floor?
My file on the work in Colorado Springs.
Can you tell us what's in it?
It's a new electrical system, completely different. As yet, it hasn't been finished.
In just what way is it different? How will it affect us?
Well, a great deal of it is merely guesswork, but it might have an important impact on the future. I hope it will lead to a decisive answer to the problem of energy. Good day, gentlemen.
Mr. Tesla,
That's all today. No more questions, please.
In 1931, Tesla announced to reporters at a press conference that he was on the verge of discovering an entirely new source of energy. Asked to explain the nature of the power, he replied, "The idea first came upon me as a tremendous shock. I can only say at this time that it will come from an entirely new and unsuspected source."
Gentlemen, I can make no guarantees other than my discoveries. I am not an insurance company. You must take my word. You will have to rely on instinct, intuition, and imagination.
War clouds were again darkening Europe. On the 11th of July 1934, the headline on the front page of the New York Times read, "Tesla, at 78. There's new death beam." The article reported that the new invention will send concentrated beams of particles through the free air of such tremendous energy that they will bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 250 miles. Tesla stated that the death beam would make war impossible by offering every country an invisible Chinese wall. The idea generated considerable interest and controversy. Tesla went immediately to J.P. Morgan, Jr. in search of financing to build a prototype of his invention. Morgan was unconvinced. Tesla also attempted to deal directly with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, but when Chamberlain resigned upon discovering that he had been outmaneuvered by Hitler at Munich, interest in Tesla's anti-war weapon eventually collapsed. By 1937, it was clear that war would soon break out in Europe. Frustrated in his attempts to generate interest and financing for his peace beam, he sent an elaborate technical paper, including diagrams, to a number of Allied nations including the United States, Canada, England, France, the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia. Titled New Art of Projecting Concentrated Non-Dispersive Energy Through Natural Media, the paper provided the first technical description of what is today called a charged particle beam weapon. What set Tesla's proposal apart from the usual run of the fantasy death rays was a unique vacuum chamber with one end open to the atmosphere. Tesla devised a unique vacuum seal by directing a high-velocity airstream at the tip of his gun to maintain high vacuum. The necessary pumping action would be accomplished with a large Tesla turbine. Of all the countries to receive Tesla's proposal, the greatest interest came from the Soviet Union. In 1937, Tesla presented a plan to the Amtorg Trading Corporation, alleged Soviet arms front in New York City. 2 years later, in 1939, one stage of the plan was tested in the USSR and Tesla received a check for $25,000. Tesla hoped that his invention would be used for purely defensive purposes, and thus would become an anti-war machine. His system required a series of power plants located along a country's coast that would scan the skies in search of enemy aircraft, since the beam was projected in a straight line. It was only effective for about 200 miles, the distance of the curvature of the Earth. Tesla also contemplated peacetime applications for his particle beam, one being to transmit power without wires over long distances. Another radical notion he proposed was to heat up portions of the upper atmosphere to light the sky at night, a man-made aurora borealis. Whether Tesla's idea was ever taken seriously is still a matter of conjecture. Most experts today consider his idea infeasible, though. His death beam bears an uncanny resemblance to the charged particle beam weapon developed by both the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Nonetheless, Tesla's dream for a technological means to end war seems as impossible now as it did when he proposed the idea in the 1930s. Tesla death rays are particle beams. Particle beams are special sorts of electromagnetic waves, a special sort of light. The white light or daily light is a mixture of different length of waves. White light is a mixture of many colors which can be separated. Red light has long waves whereas blue light has short waves. The waves making up a particle beam are quite different. Not only are all the waves the same length, but they are lined up so that the tops, peaks, of the waves coincide with each other. Particle beams can be concentrated into a tiny point. They have tremendous energy. Particle beams can produce enough heat to turn a metal into a vapor. They are accurate cutting tools that can even cut diamond, the hardest substance known to man. Particle beams are powerful enough to cut through metal in military operations. A particle beam can be bounced off a target such as an enemy airplane or ship to determine its distance and speed. Particle gyroscopes, guidance devices, are being developed to direct bombs and artillery shells to their target. Today, particle beams are used also in medicine, for microsurgery, in delicate brain surgery and for coagulation of bleeding vessels into the eye structure of retina. They are also used to treat detached retina. The particle knife is completely sterile and seals small blood vessels as it cuts, minimizing tissue bleeding. One of the more controversial topics involving Nikola Tesla is what became of many of his technical and scientific papers after he died in 1943, just before his death at the height of World War II. He claimed that he had perfected his so-called death beam, so it was natural that the FBI and other U.S. government agencies would be interested in any scientific ideas involving weaponry. Some were concerned that Tesla's papers might fall into the hands of the Axis powers or the Soviets. The morning after the inventor's death, his nephew Sava Kosanovich hurried to his uncle's room at the Hotel New Yorker. He was an up-and-coming Yugoslav official with suspected connections to the Communist Party in his country. By the time he arrived, Tesla's body had already been removed, and Kosanovich suspected that someone had already gone through his uncle's effects. Technical papers were missing as well as a black notebook he knew Tesla kept, a notebook with several hundred pages, some of which were marked "Government". P. Foxworth, assistant director of the New York FBI office, was called in to investigate. According to Foxworth, the government was vitally interested in preserving Tesla's papers. 2 days after Tesla's death, representatives of the Office of Alien Property went to his room at the New Yorker hotel and seized all his possessions. For many years, scientists and researchers have sought for Tesla's missing papers with no apparent success. It is conceivable that if Nikola Tesla knew a means for accurately projecting lethal beams of energy through the atmosphere, he may have taken it to the grave with him.
There are some theories that suggest that Tesla might have been killed over his invention of the particle weapon. And certainly there are a lot of people who suggest that Tesla's papers and notes for a particle beam weapon were stolen so that nefarious governments could work on them.
So when he passed away, he took his secrets to the afterlife. However, the Russians, who had previously bought some of his blueprints, as well as the US, who had extracted through the FBI whatever work Tesla kept in his Colorado Springs laboratory, had cracked most of his riddles as time progressed and have managed to weaponize the Tesla scalar wave effects. After the atrocities of 2 world wars, and with an ever-expanding technological advancement, world leaders have started considering ways in which they could limit or put an end to global conflicts. In 1975, during the SALT talks, Leonid Brezhnev, General Secretary of the Soviet Union at the time, had stressed that the development of new war weapons should be drastically limited because they have already become more frightening than the mind of man had imagined.
The German government took death rays very seriously.
The Nazis probably would have been interested in the particle beam weapon as one of several devices that they could use to terrorize another population.
The U.S. was engaged in fighting Hitler and the Nazis and trying to take over the world. So a weapon such as a death ray being developed by Tesla, falling into the wrong hands, could have been devastating.
Needless to say, most of the weapons in cause pertain to Tesla. His superweapon, dubbed Teleforce, was fully operational under the Soviet Union as early as the 70s. Now called the Seryshagin howitzer, the humongous Tesla scalar interferometer was exactly as Tesla had described it. It encompasses 4 modes of operation. The first one is the Tesla shield. It runs continuously and generates a thin, impenetrable hemispherical wall of energy over a selected area. It has defensive purposes and works as follows. By interfering 2 Fourier expansions and 3-dimensional scalar hemispherical patterns in space, they join into a dome-like shield of electromagnetic energy. Air molecules and atoms trapped inside are fully ionized, displaying an intense and vivid light. Any physical object that attempts to pass through this shield will receive a considerable discharge of electrical energy and will be vaporized in an instant. By stacking these energetic shells, they will deter any gamma radiation or EMPs coming its way. The second mode is more offensive. Utilizing 2 truncated Fourier transformers, the device shoots a 3-dimensional scalar 5-field pulse. A second pulse is then released, traveling at a faster velocity and overtaking the first one, merging into a deadly EMP of electromagnetic energy. The third mode is the same pulse variation ran continuously. Thus, two continuous scalar waves are sent forward, merging into vector energy at their target destination. According to some researchers, this is the exact way in which Tesla planned to transmit wireless energy, and also the weapon would annihilate hundreds of aircrafts and entire armies. The final mode, dubbed Time Squeeze, will let the user play with things like anti-gravity, dematerialization and materialization, transmutation, and it provides a great deal of medical benefits. Other effects may include subliminal and superliminal communication, seeing through Earth and the ocean, as well as reaching higher orders of reality. This is apparently possible because the human being has, between his ears, a Tesla scalar interferometer. This tiny biological device accounts for most parapsychological phenomena. It can also be triggered naturally through practice and meditation.
Today, if you were to look at one of those satellite images that shows you how the world is lit up at night, 95% of the electricity that you see in that picture, all of those lights, is distributed by alternating current. And one night he realized that he was not only getting currents through the earth, but he was also getting a consistent signal. First one beep, then two beeps, and three beeps as he listened on a telephone receiver.
The public was fascinated by this account because it made the headlines in major newspapers around the world that somehow Tesla was in communication with outer space.
Without Tesla's invention of alternating current technology, it would be a much darker and quieter world.
The technology behind Tesla's weapons is nothing new to modern man. They fall in the category of directed energy weapons, or DEWs, which are long-range weapon systems that inflict damage at a selected target by emitting powerful, focused bursts of energy. These emissions are either laser, microwaves, or particle beams. With such weapons at the disposal of world powers, it's easy to understand why another world war hasn't broken out by now. With his daring plan to arm all nations with this superweapon, it appears that Nikola Tesla has reached one of his end goals of establishing long-lasting peace between nations. Now, we can only wait and see when the world governments will release Tesla's ultimate secret of free energy.
At any given time, there's about like 7 or 8 different crazy project ideas that even though they might not ever see the light of day, but we're like, hey, you know what, let's try it out. Let's see where this goes. Before we say no to it, let's just create a prototype and see if it's actually feasible.
If these phenomena happen and our present science does not understand it, is there some force that we're leaving out of our present science? And the answer is yes.
There's always more world to explore, so I'm so curious about the next generation of inventors who are going to come after us to create things that we could not possibly even conceive of sitting here. Can't wait to see what it's going to be.
Welcome back. By the numbers, a real-life Star Wars weapon. The Raytheon Corporation and the United States Navy have successfully developed and tested anti-aircraft laser. I'll say that again. We have a laser gun that shoots down airplanes. It was tested against a drone flying over 300 miles an hour, picked it out of the sky. Like my little sound effect there. We can't give you the exact details of the height or the UAV or the range of the laser because that information is top secret, so only a few million people have that, as we learned from the Washington Post yesterday. But the firm is working on a sister land-based system that could be used to target mortar and rocket rounds, which I'm sure will be a welcome addition to bases in Afghanistan who are fighting a war for absolutely no reason so that fear-mongering jackasses in this country can feel good about themselves. The one drawback? It doesn't give us the colors or cool sound effects we've come to expect after years of studying Skywalker's X-Wing fighter. Luckily, Raytheon has provided an artist's rendering that gives the people, at least in their minds, what they want.
Violent arrests are taking place in New York, where a huge anti-Wall Street rally is underway. Hundreds of activists are marching across the city, pledging to occupy streets, bridges and the subway in protest against economic inequality. Artie's report now is in downtown New York for us. Rina, hi there. These demonstrators are promising, aren't they, the biggest action since the movement began exactly 2 months ago. Take us through exactly what's happening now, then.
Well, Kevin, we're about 3 hours into this day-long Occupy Wall Street event marking the 2-month anniversary of this movement that began here in New York, blazed around the country. So far, as you mentioned, dozens of people have been arrested. We have seen violent clashes between police officers and the activists that have been walking through Lower Manhattan. Both men and women tackled to the ground, then arrested, hauled off in vans. Police, before we came live to me, police were just securing the barricades that are right next to me here. Riot police are all around us. Sound cannons have already been used on the crowds that have been marching through Lower Manhattan.
Does anyone know if sound has ever been used as a weapon?
You know, who'll know? Tell us, Mr. Audio.
In biblical times, the walls of Jericho were reported to have been leveled by sound. In more recent times, loud and obnoxious sounds played at high volume have been used to disorient and annoy an enemy. In 1957, by accident, Dr. Vladimir Govro and his research team discovered that sound could also become a very deadly weapon. Govro's team was working on robotics research when they all became very ill. After an investigation, it was discovered that there was an improperly installed ventilator motor in their building that, when coupled with a long air shaft that acted like an organ pipe, had created an inaudible 7 Hz tone. Once the team recovered, they decided to research and see if they could repeat what had happened and possibly create a weapon. They called their weapon the infrasonic organ. They demonstrated it, and it almost killed them a second time. In an attempt to make the weapon more compact and controllable, Dr. Govro created his infrasonic whistle, which could be robotically guided onto a battlefield and kill everyone on the ground, all without making a sound. at least none that anyone could hear.
Thanks, Mr. Audio.
For more interesting facts about sound, visit Mr. Audio at soundimages.com.
Sound cannons have already been used. Sound cannons. Sound cannons. Sound cannons.
Sound cannons have already been used. Sound cannons have already been used on the crowds that have been marching through Lower Manhattan.
Restricted zone. This is a naval exclusionary zone. Please back away from the area. This is an exclusionary zone for naval activity only. This is a naval exclusionary zone. Please back away from this area. Back away from this area.
I can look over a fence on a border and talk to someone more than a mile away, clearly. And believe me, it also can be a deterrent to people.
Unidentified small boat. You are approaching a United States warship operating in international waters. Your identity is unknown and your intentions are unclear. You are approaching a United States warship operating in international waters. Your identity is unknown and your intentions are unclear. You are standing into danger and may be subject to defensive measures.
What we add that is critical is directionality. That's our claim to fame. This guy has a 40+ decibel component from front to sides or back. That means I can stand beside it or behind it when it's playing very loud and carry on a conversation. I can talk on my cell phone. The other thing is, because it's so directional, I'm focusing the energy.
Waters. Your identity is unknown and your intention.
One report I heard was from a military person that as soon as you play the deterrent tones, it's familiar now, and they scurry out of there. They don't want to experience it anymore. And you know, who knows how many lives that saves, both on the other side and on our side. They couple these things with a turret, with a machine gun, and quite often they don't have to use the machine gun.
Comprends pas, nous avons exigé la notification aux autorités. Vaisseau qui approche le navire de passagers. Attention, vous êtes dans la zone de sécurité reconnue de ce navire.
You shoot the sound in the window or the door, and they leave quickly. Shoot it in caves, they leave. I've heard of one of the police departments here in California serving a verbal warrant, and they're 100 or 200 yards away, out of harm's way from someone who refuses to come out of their house or a hotel room. There have been instances where people said, well, what if they wear earplugs or put their fingers in their ears? The device is designed with sufficient intensity. That really doesn't do a heck of a lot. We've got some sounds that we play that'll vibrate your head, shake your chest.
That's pretty intense. Yeah.
This is a test of the long-range acoustic device LRAD.
One acoustic device is gaining ground daily by being law enforcement's go-to choice for crowd control scenarios and search and rescue missions. That device is LRAD. I'm Terry Shepard, and this is Digital Justice.
That's what's gotten most of the interest from people out there on the other side. We really don't look at this as any kind of a weapon, non-lethal or otherwise.
And though reluctant to speak on camera, law enforcement officials stand behind LRAD.
The alarm tone is mostly used, especially in law enforcement applications, especially when protests get out of control or you get large crowds. And with LRAD, that fills that critical gap between bullhorns and rubber bullets.
But many groups, including the ACLU, have issues with LRAD.
I think LRAD has no place at public events and forums, especially ones that any free speech expression activity is too intimidating, it's too scary, and so chills speech that we want to encourage in a democracy.
Are these machines causing any harmful side effects to the eardrums and the senses? Some would say it is possible that they are. So that would be considered torture.
My wife had one used on her in Oakland. It was like a kind of psychological torture. Like it's in your brain and you can't think, you can't move.
I'd rather be tased, shot with a rubber bullet, maced, and then kicked in the balls than have my eardrums erupted.
There you have it. In the eyes of law enforcement, LRAD is an effective tool that's use will certainly continue to spread. But in the eyes of others, it's a potential weapon just waiting to be abused. No matter the opinion, it looks like LRAD is here to stay. I'm Terry Shepard, and this has been Digital Justice.
The mystery, who or what caused American officials living in these Havana homes and several hotels to suffer headaches, dizziness, and some serious brain injuries similar to a concussion. Last year, Cuban investigators told us they would never allow their territory to be used that way. But now Russia is the leading suspect, NBC News has learned, according to 3 U.S. officials and 2 others briefed on the investigation. Evidence, they say, backed up by highly secret communications intercepts collected during a lengthy and ongoing investigation involving the FBI, CIA, and other agencies. U.S. officials also tell NBC News investigators now believe the Americans were deliberately targeted.
Exclusive new reporting this morning from NBC News. Intelligence agencies investigating attacks on U.S. diplomats in Cuba and China now strongly suspect that Russia is to blame. 26 government workers in Havana had mysterious brain injuries starting in late 2016. And then this year, 1 U.S. worker in China was diagnosed with similar symptoms. Joining me now with more on this is NBC News intelligence and national security reporter Ken Delaney. And so this has been a mystery. The CIA, the FBI, other intelligence agencies have all been working to try to figure out what exactly happened here. Why do they suspect Russia now, and what's the evidence that they have?
But now, Andrea, this is really more than a theory. This is the main suspect, and it's backed up with at least some information from some communications intercepts known as signals intelligence that officials tell NBC News that the U.S. government has developed. But, Andrea, it's not yet conclusive enough for the U.S. to take what would be a very dramatic step of formally accusing Russia of being behind these attacks. So the United States will continue to develop evidence, try to hunt this down.
Just another example, if any were needed, that the biggest peddlers of conspiracy nonsense are the establishment media lackeys. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.
So I think most of you in August will remember the headlines with the
Cuban sonic weapon harms diplomats. Let me read a little bit from the initial article. State Department spokesman Heather Nauert said the government does not have any definitive answers about the source of the attack. Notice they say attack. It is continuing to investigate what may have caused the diplomats' injuries. However, U.S. officials who spoke anonymously to the AP said that the hearing loss was caused by a device deployed either inside or near the diplomats' residences. And the device emitted a sound that was not audible to human ears, they added. This would indicate it was most likely an infrasonic or ultrasonic weapon. Wow. You know, all I could think of was a sonic ray gun, right? Sounds like science fiction. Well, let's discuss this a little further. Now, those diplomat victims had a variety of symptoms. Some had hearing loss, some had ringing in their ears, others had headache, nausea, memory problems, such as not remembering the right word for an object, or speech problems, and some even had brain swelling and like a mild concussion, signs of mild brain trauma. And one even had a blood disorder. So I mean, a variety of symptoms. Now, a reporter from the New York Times interviewed a bunch of acoustic experts and scientists to see what they thought if this technology was possible. And their conclusion was highly improbable. So, is there really a sonic weapon that can cause the kind of damage that this sonic weapon reportedly did? I really don't think so. I really don't think so.
I really don't think so.
Shh! Do you hear that? Yeah, I don't either, but it's making me feel creeped out. Hey guys, Julia here for D News. The world is loud and noisy, and it only seems to be getting louder. Obviously, exposure to loud noises can cause hearing damage, but some studies, like one published in the British Medical Bulletin, show that it can cause a range of ill health effects like anxiety and stress, and another study showed it may even raise blood pressure. And that's just the sounds you can hear. There's a whole world of sound that's below our range of hearing that can also be damaging. Infrasound typically describes sound below 20 hertz. Usually, it's too low for humans to pick up, yet some animals communicate in this range. Like elephants vocalize in a low rumble that we can't hear. But infrasound can be artificial too. Loudspeakers and public address systems, industrial machinery, that kind of thing, can kick out sounds that are too low in frequency for humans to hear, but it might be making us sick. A study published in the journal Indoor and Built Environment found that infrasound could be contributing to a condition called sick building syndrome, a condition where office workers complain of nausea, dizziness, migraine, fatigue, and tinnitus with no attributable cause. Yet the study suggests that infrasound, typically of about 7 hertz, might be responsible. Unfortunately, infrasound isn't regulated all that well. A recent report in the Proceedings of the Royal Society A questions the idea of what makes up safe sound levels in a working environment. The report suggests that workplace exposure to both infrasound and ultrasound often exceeds current guidelines. There's concern too that the guidelines are too low and outdated, coming from research that's 40 years old. And even then, the evidence for the guidelines isn't strong enough. They are based on the average response of a small group, often of adult males. The researchers back then didn't reach any strong conclusions, just preliminary guidelines, believing that more research would be done. But in the ensuing decades, not much has changed. So basically, the lead author of this new report is saying more research is needed. But there is evidence that infrasounds cause more than just headaches. Some researchers think it might be responsible for that creepy haunted house feeling. One paper published in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research suggests that a standing sound wave of specifically 18.9 hertz is responsible for some of the spooky happenings in their lab. Researchers at Coventry University kept seeing moving things out of the corners of their eyes. Their hair kept standing on end. They felt simply dreadful anytime they were in the lab. But one day, they noticed a piece of equipment was vibrating without an apparent cause, and discovered that an extractor fan was creating a standing wave at, you guess it, 18.9 hertz. When they turned off the fan, one of the authors described the feeling as if a huge weight was lifted. And researchers have tested this idea on a larger audience, literally. British scientists played music to a large auditorium filled with people and slipped infrasound into some of their songs. Some people in the audience said they felt uneasy or sorrowful, getting chills down the spine or nervous feelings of revulsion or fear when the songs contained infrasound. Spooky, right? Now, it's science. But don't be put off by sound waves yet. Not all of them are creepy. In fact, sound waves can do some pretty cool stuff. To learn more about how scientists are harnessing the power of sound, check out this episode right here.
If you gently flick a wine glass with your fingernail, you will hear its frequency. Match that tone and turn the volume up, way up to like 11, and that glass will probably break.
TestTube now has a newsletter. Get a weekly roundup of our most popular videos across all of our shows at testtube.com/forward. So, have you ever gotten that creepy feeling or felt sick in your office or school for no reason? Do you think it might have been infrasound? Tell me your stories down below. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons and keep coming back to D News so you don't miss a single episode.
Science fiction is filled with tractor beams, so real researchers have been working on making that technology science fact. And we're getting closer with a new acoustic tractor beam that has lifted the largest object ever, a 2-centimeter ball. In the movies, tractor beams are beams of some undefined energy, but IRL, that's not the case. Commonly, researchers use sound. The idea of harnessing sound waves for levitation isn't new. Scientists have been exploiting the properties of air and sound to this end for a while. Remember that air is a fluid that behaves like a liquid even if we can't see or feel it the same way. And sound is a physical vibration even if we don't think of it as such. Basically, harnessing acoustic power is harnessing the lifting effect of physical sound waves as they move through the air. The sound compresses the air in waves, and those waves correspond to the sound's wavelength. Acoustic levitation uses this wave to balance against gravity. The result is a free-floating particle that looks a little like science fiction magic. Dialing in the sound waves mean lifting objects with extreme precision. The thing is, it's not exactly an easy technology to scale up. Researchers have been struggling for years to lift an object larger than the sound wave they're using. Every time they try, the object spins because the rotating sound field transfers motion. Eventually, the object ends up flying out of the sound wave. But researchers have finally managed to control the spinning motion by spinning the sound wave instead. Using ultrasonic waves at a frequency similar to one that only bats can hear, they created a vortex of sound that they twist to stabilize the beam. From there, they increased the size of the silent core to where it was able to hold a 2-centimeter polystyrene sphere. It's tiny, but it's 2 times larger than the waves lifting it, making it the largest object ever levitated with sound. So yes, the object is small, but the implications are big, relatively speaking. The researchers are looking ahead at using very deliberately directed tractor beams to move kidney stones through the body or direct a capsule of pharmaceuticals to a target area. So it might be a while before we're lifting humans, but the upside is medical advances will be great until then. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and be sure to subscribe for more Seeker. Speaking of medical advances, what if one shot could give you all your vaccines? Trace has more on that right here. But on tractor beams, if you think about how this works, it can't happen in space. Without air, there's no sound waves. We'll have to harness some other energy for our sci-fi needs.
I'd like to show you an example of levitating small objects with sound waves. Let me just remind you how a loudspeaker works. It's just a diaphragm that repeatedly pushes on the air, producing high pressure waves that move away. And that's what we have here with this little gizmo. It does the same thing, except it's at a very high frequency, 28,000 hertz, which is way above our human hearing range. So these sound waves move upward, and up above I have a glass plate which is going to reflect the sound back down again. And when the distance between the glass plate and the loudspeaker is just right, then those sound waves that are moving down will interfere constructively with the sound waves coming up and give us regions of high pressure and low pressure which don't move around. They stay in one spot. And it's in those high pressure zones that I'm going to try to levitate a small ball. So let me turn on the power, and even though I can't hear it, I'm still going to use ear protection. As I said before, the distance between the reflector and the loudspeaker is just right. If I change it, and which I'm going to do, you'll see that this standing wave disappears and the balls are no longer suspended there. We've now set up the little loudspeaker and the reflector in front of this mirror, which is part of our Schlieren optic setup. And the purpose of that is to be able to actually see where there are regions of high pressure and low pressure in the air, especially the air between the reflector and the loudspeaker. So let me turn up the volume, and before I do that, I will put on my protective hearing. And if I adjust the height of the reflector, there's a point at which you see bands of white, light, and dark. This is the standing wave, and it only happens when the distance between the reflector and the speaker is some multiple of a half a wavelength. So every single one of those bands is a half a wavelength. If I go up a little higher, then it disappears again, but if I continue to go higher, then it will come back when I'm at another half a wavelength, a multiple of a half a wavelength away. Now, it's in these bands that I'm going to place the little balls. And you can see the little ball settles down where there's a bright band, and that is the high pressure area. And I know it's a high pressure because you see there's a white band right next to the reflector, which is where the highest pressure will be. If I again change the height, the standing wave goes away and the little balls will fall down.
We like to think that technology now is better than it ever was, but when exploring history, we find that our ancestors from thousands of years ago can still baffle us with their ingenuity. Despite our advancement, many technologies and inventions from antiquity are still not fully understood by modern-day scientists. Here are some of the inventions so much ahead of their time that we still can't explain or recreate. Ancient Greek and Roman historians recorded that during the siege of Syracuse in 212 BC, Archimedes constructed a heat ray weapon to set the Roman warships ablaze. The heat ray of Archimedes used highly polished bronze or copper shields that acted as mirrors to focus the sun's power on incoming enemy ships. Many have tried to recreate this weapon and failed, like Mythbusters, who attempted this not once but several times. This makes the heat ray definitely one of the simplest, yet profoundly advanced technologies ancient people have used.
Archimedes' heat ray. According to records and images from the time, in 212 BC, during the siege of Syracuse, Archimedes built a burning glass contraption that was able to set fire to numerous Roman ships from a great distance. It's thought that he used a series of parabolic mirrors to focus the sun's rays to achieve such an effect, and the idea has since become known as Archimedes' heat ray. Since then, though, no one has been able to use sunlight to be able to do this. Could it have been something else? The problem is, despite our current knowledge of how mirrors work, it has proven virtually impossible to recreate the effects of what his weapon did during that battle. Even the TV show Mythbusters tried to recreate it and determined that it wasn't possible. However, in 2005, a team at MIT seemed to get close to a design that would have the desired effect 100 feet away. Some solar panel farms focus intense beams of light with a series of mirrors, and while it definitely wouldn't be a good idea for a human to touch one of these beams, they still aren't dangerous enough to set fire to a fleet of ships. So the question remains, how did Archimedes do it?
Electrolaser. The scariest thought in warfare is an enemy taking control of the natural elements. That power is reserved for Greek gods. Who could fight nature? Well, you might be surprised to learn that the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey can now control lightning. The laser is used to create a plasma channel by heating the air around it, and this plasma can conduct electricity. So they can send a powerful electric current along the plasma channel, just like lightning, but lightning they can aim at a specific target. It even creates a thunderous sonic boom like natural lightning, and it's powerful enough to kill people. They can also use it to disable or even destroy electronic devices, further disabling whoever gets in their way. They can even be shot from an aircraft like a genuine natural lightning bolt, but targeted at something specific. It's a shockingly terrifying weapon, pun intended, that we should all hope never falls into the wrong hands. Every year, military weapons become more advanced as each country tries to stay one step ahead of each other. This means a constantly growing number of astounding and terrifying innovations in the machines soldiers hold in their hands every day. Here are some of the most futuristic and advanced weapons, if you're brave enough to look. Phaser rifle. Some of the most advanced weapons aren't made for taking out the enemy, but instead are used in more creative ways to incapacitate ground troops. The Personnel Halting and Stimulation Response Rifle, or Phaser, is an ingenious rifle designed to completely disorient your enemies. Despite the UN banning laser weapons used to blind soldiers, this one gets around the laws very cleverly using a two-wave laser which only temporarily blinds their target, unlike older laser guns which would permanently blind people. The safety of this gun means that not only soldiers will be using it, but probably police as well. The very futuristic weapon, which was almost certainly named after the Star Trek weapon, not only temporarily blinds people, but disorients them so much they're unlikely to stay standing. You try fighting without being able to see or stand up. Nobody who encounters this clever laser gun will be winning any fights.
Inspired by Tesla, the goal of the Japanese was to create a magnetron that would emit a high-powered beam intended to be able to cause both major psychological and physical problems to masses of enemy soldiers, which would then, the Japanese hoped, lead to death.
The high-powered FEL uses a superconducting electron gun, which is powered by a microwave tube.
FEL is very unique. It is tunable and can generate multiple wavelengths. This is needed because the Navy is going to encounter threats in various scenarios across the world, and the environment will change. And the typical lasers only have one wavelength, which means they lose the effectiveness in other environments because of the way the light propagates. FEL can change its wavelength, so it can propagate in multiple environments, and we can change it to suit wherever we are.
ONR recently awarded a contract to Boeing to build the next generation free electron laser to go from the current 14 kilowatt FEL capability to a 100 kilowatt FEL.
The benefits definitely are greater than the investments that we're putting in today for our future armed forces.
The weapon can have an almost endless magazine of laser bursts. Why? Because they can recharge these weapons just like you recharge your phone. So, current laser technology, because they were invented several decades ago, lasers are the most mature of the directed energy weapon technologies. Laser dazzlers, devices that use laser light to temporarily blind sensors, optics, and personnel are already available for law enforcement and military use. Chemical oxygen iodine laser coil. When the coil fires, maximum energy is transmitted to the target. The skin of the missile heats up, melts, and deforms. Advanced tactical laser that they use to attack ground targets.
According to legend, a really good blast of air should be able to bring down a house of straw. Let's see how it goes with an explosively generated vortex ring. Here goes. This is the gas. It's the first time it's ever been fired, and with 150 litres of one of the world's most explosive gas mixes in there, I'm not even sure that this is really a safe place to stand. Seems about right. I'm going to need these, I reckon. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh, yes! Call me hopeful, but there was definitely something there. But was it a vortex ring? Filmed at 1300 frames per second, there is no doubt. But the ring you can see is not a smoke ring. It's formed by the pressure drop within the vortex, condensing the water out of the damp air above the lake. A 200-mile-an-hour cloud. Ho, ho, ho. Bring on the sticks and bricks. Three, 2, 1. What? Yes! Fantastic! Well, it makes mincemeat of a house of sticks. Bring on the bricks. Even in fairy stories, they couldn't get a blast of air to knock down a house of bricks. We're heading into the world of the unknown a little bit, so we've got to experiment. We're going to try changing the elevation on it, changing the gas mix in there, see if we can get a perfect gas mix. So that's just the right amount of molecules of acetylene reacting with just the amount of molecules of oxygen in the air. So there's no passengers in there, it's got to be all explosion.
Let's see how that goes. Three, two, one. Hey! Yes! That's incredible!
We can hear the announcement. We can see the light.
And we're not going to go very far.
I say again, reverse course immediately. You are in a Navy vessel exclusion zone. Abort your mission. Abort your mission. Abort your mission. Abort your mission. Halt. Go no further. Halt. Go no further. Halt. Go no further.
Microwave weapons. High-power microwave weapons work by producing either beams or short bursts of high-frequency radio energy, similar in principle to the microwave oven. Microwave energy encounters unshielded wires or electronic components. It induces a current in them, which causes the equipment to malfunction. At higher energy levels, the microwaves can permanently burn out equipment, much as a close lightning strike could.
Well, Zach, officials tell me apparently the fire was started by a lightning strike. Now, right now it's estimated to be about 8 to 10 acres in size, and it was reported just after 6.
You're not going to see it, you're not going to hear it, you're not going to smell it, you're going to feel it.
A smaller scale, more mobile version is being developed by the U.S. Army and the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Program, utilizing solid-state technology. This system will demonstrate and prove out the critical technologies for a follow-on tactical system, which will be an adjunct system that can be installed on a range of tactical or support vehicles. It will have an azimuth drive for full 360-degree coverage, E-steering and azimuth for fine steering control, and full E-steering and elevation. With an invisible beam, speed of light targeting, and silent operation, it can be used in a wide range of operations, such as enhanced combat mobility in dense urban areas, where it quickly and safely moves civilians obstructing vehicle mobility. Or it can be used to safely deter unarmed but suspicious civilians observing U.S. forces. At entry control points, it provides an additional layer of response for dealing with potentially threatening targets and potential crowd violence. It can be quickly de-escalated by targeting the leader, or if necessary, by panning across the entire crowd, while armed individuals mixed in a crowd can be engaged without risk to surrounding civilians. Since the beam can penetrate window glass, it can also be used for non-lethal engagement of suspicious vehicles potentially threatening U.S. forces. The SS-ADT will be a lightweight, non-kinetic, non-lethal anti-personnel system, providing an alternative to lethal force.
A wave of extreme heat that comes from nowhere. It's one of the U.S. military's newest non-lethal weapons, an electromagnetic beam that emits an odorless, invisible, and silent blast of heat.
It felt like opening up an oven door, almost mixed with a sting from about my sternum to my neck. So like you started to really feel it on my neck before I had to kind of instinctually jump out of the way.
This weapon, under development for 15 years, has yet to be used in the field. The technology has attracted safety concerns, though the U.S. military says the rays do not penetrate the skin and pose no health risks.
If an operator is squeezing the trigger and there's a lot going on and he inadvertently keeps squeezing the trigger, there's an automatic shutoff for 3 seconds.
Out of 11,000 exposures on people, only 2 minor injuries have been recorded. The Pentagon has not yet decided whether it will order the active denial system, whose powerful beam can reach up to 1,000 meters.
Picture like an invisible searchlight, right? You know what a searchlight looks like? So an invisible searchlight of radio waves going downrange. So it's this big when it starts, and at the end, it's the same size.
Eventually, the weapon could be put to a wide array of uses, such as thwarting hostile attacks, dispersing mobs, and reinforcing security. For now, it remains just a prototype.
SSADT uses radio frequency millimeter waves at a frequency of 95 gigahertz. Traveling at the speed of light, the millimeter wave directed energy engages the subject, penetrating the skin to a depth of only about 1/64th of an inch. The beam produces an intolerable heating sensation, compelling the targeted individual to instinctively move. For the military, active denial technology can be used for both force application and force protection missions. Applications include crowd control, perimeter security, patrol and convoy protection, and other defensive and offensive operations from both fixed site or mobile platforms. While the active denial system advanced concept technology demonstration succeeded in demonstrating a large-scale version of active denial technology.
So, the inevitability of smart dust. So what is smart dust? Well, smart dust, of course, isn't a new concept. It originated with DARPA back in the 90s. And it's general purpose computing, sensors, wireless networking, all bundled up into millimeter scale sensor modes, drifting in the air currents, flecks of computing power settling on your skin, ingested, monitoring you inside and out. This powder-sized chip, and that's a salt crystal, so this is a small thing, is something called the Mu chip from Hitachi. It's the smallest commercially available RFID system in the world and can be pulse powered by radio waves. It doesn't require a battery. You can literally scatter this stuff like dust or embed it into a sheet of paper. And you know what the really interesting thing about this technology is? This was commercially released 10 years ago.
New research in Britain has raised concerns about the potentially harmful effect of nanoparticles. The emerging technology is used in a variety of medicines and even sunscreen. The research found that the small particles could damage the DNA of cells.
They're tiny microscopic particles which can store and release drugs in specific areas of the body.
There's an emerging sort of body of evidence that says that for some particles of certain scales and of certain materials, that there are potential health risks.
New British research has added to that concern. It found nanoparticles could damage cells without even entering them. Scientists found the particles change the function of cells and how they communicate with other cells.
What this study shows is that even with a barrier between the blood supply where the nanoparticles are and cells, that there can be damage to cells, and not just a bit of damage, but significant damage to the DNA.
One of the biggest areas of concerns has been the use of nanoparticles in sunscreen. A review this year by the Therapeutic Goods Administration found sunscreen was safe and that the particles didn't penetrate skin cells. If trends in science continue, there's no doubt nanoparticles will be used more and more.
We really need to do fairly sophisticated studies of the toxicity of nanoparticles before we use them extensively in humans.
The TGA says it will monitor scientific literature should any tangible safety concerns be identified.
The first public, nice, detailed public description was in the book of Cara St. Louis Farrelly, The Sun Thief, where she says that there are hollow fibers sprayed, self-replicating hollow fibers that are there to kind of read out the light fingerprint of your DNA, transform it into an electromagnetic radio signal that is detectable via satellite and ground stations. This is what she found out by analyzing information dealt with the chemtrail communities in the United States. Yes.
We'll have this.
He said it had been tested in the last Iraq war. This was the war was only done for the purpose of testing the system.
Now you're talking about the most recent one with
yes,
George Bush.
with the junior.
With W.
Yeah.
Bush.
Yeah.
And they sprayed that in Iraq.
And they sprayed it in Iraq, and we had single news, for example, that they fought back the Iraqi army by utilizing microwave weapons that gave them the feeling that the skin burns.
Yeah.
This was in public media and
Yes.
mainstream media. And this is not because the microwave weapon had the intensity to make it burn. This is because the RNA was triggered to create the sensation of burning.
Right.
So this had a kind of agent within the bodies of the Iraqi army. They tested all other aspects of it.
Which are these aspects?
From the text he says you have these psychotronic weapons, making them give up, making them fall in love with the American soldiers, whatever. A long list of psychotronic functions. And you can make people sick, you can make them die of cancer after 1 year, you can make them die in 6 minutes, and you can make them die in 6 seconds if you want to. This is what he listed. And but the most interesting thing from this paper is that he said that they spent 10 billion US and half a year, I think it was half a year, to optimize the cluster topology. And this is something, it sounds just like science fiction if you say it like this, but if you really think about it, if it is only about infecting humans with a virus-like synthetic RNA, you could give a damn about cluster topology. Cluster topology starts to become an interesting topic if this RNA cluster is supposed to carry a soul. Only then a soul or an artificial intelligence or whatever, an RNA. This is kind of the first time that I had an input, an idea of how do they turn people into biorobots. You have the RNA cluster within the air, sprayed in the air with a defined distance from RNA to RNA. And within the human body, the same RNA cluster is prolonged within the cells. And now, whatever is carried by these clusters, the artificial intelligence or a program or a soul, whatever this is, can travel from the dust into the human being.
This is smart dust.
And this is what they call smart dust. Morgellon topic is, you find it described as a transhumanistic technology to extract light from the human body, turn it into a radio signal to read out what happens within the human, and opposite way to insert light, not radio frequency, to the human to make him feel whatever you want to make him feel. If you take this Morgellon concept, if you take the nanocrystals, the nanocrystal concept, and if you take all the other things, and then you look into some internal papers of the NASA. This is something that went online, I don't know when, 2000 maybe, or a little bit earlier. It wasn't meant to be published. It was an internal lecture in the NASA facilities in the United States.
I like the way you say NASA. Is that just your thick German accent, or are you putting a Z in there intentionally?
No, it was not intentionally, but it is like this. And they kind of inform each other about future strategic issues for warfare, projecting to the year 2025 with a subtitle, big subtitle, "The Future is Now." And if you look through it, you find the concept of some sensor swarm, smart dust. You find nanotechs, which is identical with the Morgellon function. And you find co-opted insects. But NASA knows all the components, and it is interlocked in the United States. If you go to Silicon Valley, you have 3 big buildings. One is Singularity University, with the founder Ray Kurzweil, who is dreaming about, and there are interviews out there where Kurzweil is dreaming about sending nanobots to other planets to harvest energy and matter, to multiply the overall intelligence of the human-machine civilization. Originally his words. And then he asks himself if there's a God that exists, and he says, not yet. Yeah? This is Ray Kurzweil. Now, next building from Singularity University, transhumanistic headquarters, is Google headquarters, where he now is head developer, same Ray Kurzweil. And on the other side of the university is NASA headquarters, the one who is certifying the planes to spray, according to Kara's novel.
Innovation has many fathers and mothers. Tesla was definitely one of the fathers.
Tesla was an extraordinary inventor and scientist.
Tesla gave us alternating current, our main electrical grid around the world. Electric motors, electric generators. The ideas of free energy.
Oh, it looks like a bad one.
Tesla had that passion to create new things nonstop, no matter how crazy they were.
What is a genius? I think the term is way overused. I think Tesla fits the bill because he didn't just invent one invention in one area, he was in many different areas. So he really was a genius.
I would be honored to even consider myself as a child of Tesla.
I almost feel like I'm related to him, or like, sometimes I say, maybe he was reincarnated in me. Maybe it's my job to pass along that message.
As a reporter at the Toronto Star, I was asked to go to St. John's to report on the anniversary of Marconi sending the first wireless communications across the Atlantic. And as I was doing research in preparation for that, I started to come up with information saying that, well, maybe it wasn't Marconi, maybe it was this guy named Tesla. And I started to dig more into Tesla, and I found his life dramatically more fascinating than Marconi. Today, we walk around with these devices, and most people, 99.9% of people, don't know that a big portion of the inspiration behind that is Tesla.
And I don't really know for sure, but I have a feeling that some of his most important secret papers are still locked away in military intelligence here in the United States.
If you look at the accomplishments Tesla made, we have it all around us. I want to tell the world that these people, if you consider them mad like Tesla was mad, or perceived as being mad, that's a good thing. Some of these people might not be successful, but even if just one of those people turns out to be the next generation Tesla, you can imagine the benefits that would bring to the world. So I want more people who are mad like Tesla.
Every day, I learn something new. And step by step, I'm gonna change the world as Tesla would have wanted it.